This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
They couldn't stop the war when it was happening, but dozens of nations are now lining up to donate money to rebuild Gaza. A conference in the Egyptian town of Sharm el-Sheikh is aiming to raise nearly $3 billion to build new homes and schools and restore infrastructure smashed by Israel's war. But many of the nations have given money before, only to see their projects blown apart.
We are all aware that reconstruction and development efforts remain weak and volatile in the absence of a political solution. The Israelis, with their wars, have on many occasions destroyed our hospitals, our schools, and the infrastructure that we have built with the support of our friends. Our farms and our orchards have been turned into arid land because of Israeli bulldozers and tanks.
An arid land, that's the Palestinian president's description of Gaza. Todd Baer is in the Strip and has been looking at just what needs to be done.
Rebuilding in Gaza is an enormous project, now being done on a grassroots level with few tools, little money, and no organization. Most of the infrastructure is destroyed beyond repair.
It's been massive. The scale of damage here and destruction is massive.
John Ging, the UN's top official in Gaza, says it is difficult to determine where to begin. So much has to be fixed, and soon.
It's extremely frustrating for everybody, not least the poor people, who cannot understand why their basic legal rights are not being upheld. They have a right to a livelihood. They have a right to a dignified existence.
Israel's 22-day offensive on the Gaza Strip left a trail of destruction. From schools to government buildings to homes, all turned into rubble. Thousands of people are living in tents, those like Saba Abed Rabu, whose home was hit by an Israeli missile.
Hopefully we will get some donations or outside support. I expect that.
Billions of dollars have been pledged to fund the reconstruction effort here, but the Israeli blockade, which has cut off Gaza from the outside world, is still in effect, and it is preventing tons of building materials like concrete, steel, and glass from getting in.
We do know what needs to be done. The question is whether we're going to be allowed to do it or not. It's all to do with the crossing and access. If we can't get the materials in, then nothing is going to happen here.
In addition to all of this, several water tanks were destroyed. 90% of the water is not drinkable. So damaged is the main sewage plant that raw sewage is pouring into the Mediterranean Sea.
It's very, very bad, to point that we cannot really say that the economy, the tourism, the education could rely on our water and wastewater systems. It will never be developed.
I'm not just appealing for humanity here, I'm appealing for legality.
John Ging is begging for the border crossings to be opened so reconstruction can begin. It is time, he says, for the politicians to finally put the people's interests ahead of theirs. Todd Baer, Al Jazeera, Gaza City.
So much work to do, but there are so many issues facing those gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, the amount needed is put at this, $2.8 billion. But then comes the tricky part. Who gets to control the money? Well, the Palestinian Authority is the one favored by Western governments and many of the Arab nations, but they're no longer in charge of Gaza. It's Hamas who have the power there, but few people want to give them the money, and they're not involved in the conference. The other potential recipients are aid agencies, but then there's the problem of making sure the cash is used in the most effective way and actually helps Gaza develop. And whoever gets the aid, how will it get in to Gaza? There's still severe restrictions on the border, and Israel also says it wants project-by-project approval to make sure Hamas is not involved. It won't allow in anything that it considers might also have a military use, such as cement and steel rods. Well, in her address to the conference, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the Obama administration was committed to pushing hard for Israelis and Palestinians to exist peacefully in separate states.
Time is of the essence. We cannot afford more setbacks and delays or regrets about what might have been had different decisions been made. And now is not the time for recriminations. It is time to look ahead. We gather today to address the humanitarian and early recovery needs of the Palestinian people after the recent conflict, and the United States joins with others in generously stepping forward to help. Our pledge of over $900 million, designed in coordination with the Palestinian Authority and to be submitted to the United States Congress, will deliver assistance to the people of Gaza and the West Bank. All of us recognize that human progress depends on the human spirit, that a child growing up in Gaza without shelter, health care, or an education has the same right to go to school, see a doctor, and live with a roof over her head as a child growing up in your country or mine. That a mother and father in the West Bank, struggling to fulfill their dreams for their children, have the same right as parents anywhere else in the world to a good job, a decent home, and the tools to achieve greater prosperity and peace. That progress toward the goals we seek here today is more likely to grow out of opportunity than futility, out of hope than out of misery. So we will work with our Palestinian partners, President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad, to address critical humanitarian, budgetary, security, and infrastructure needs. We have worked with the Palestinian Authority to install safeguards that will ensure that our funding is only used where and for whom it is intended and does not end up in the wrong hands. In pledging these funds, we are pursuing both a short and long-term approach. It is not enough just to respond to the immediate needs of the Palestinian people.
Although the Kadima party has only one seat more than the Likud party in the Knesset, the right-wing extremist parties have given Netanyahu, the head of the Likud party, something that he has not been offered by Tzipi Livni, the head of the Kadima party.
This is how Netanyahu obtained the right to form a government from the Israeli president, Shimon Peres. Rather than the political game being played by major parties, bets are now being placed on the smaller extremist parties.
Almost overnight, Avigdor Lieberman, the head of the Israel Beitenu party, has become a Trojan horse upon which the formation of a government relies on. His party came in third in the elections.
For those who are betting on Livni's peace and pessimistic about Netanyahu's peace, all signs indicate that all bets will be lost from the start. Livni's Kadima party was an offshoot of Netanyahu's Likud party.
Let's see this report about the dilemma and events surrounding the formation of the next Israeli government headed by Netanyahu.
After Benjamin Netanyahu failed to form an Israeli government and to convince the head of the Kadima party, Tzipi Livni, and the head of the Labour Party, Ehud Barak, to join a broad national unity government headed by him, the prospect of a narrow right-wing government has become more likely. Livni expressed her disappointment about Netanyahu's approach, which rejects adopting a plan that will lead the Hebrew state to make peace with the Palestinians. Netanyahu still has 1 month to form a government. He's making efforts to form a broad government with those belonging to the so-called Zionist moderates. It's clear that Netanyahu is prepared to make major compromises to Livni with regards to cabinet positions, starting with the foreign minister and the minister of war.
I even discovered rejection to form combined teams for deliberations in order to find that shared way that I am convinced we can achieve. Unfortunately, I did not find willingness for unity from Mrs. Livni in this critical period for the country.
We will not be a part of Netanyahu's unity government. In any case, what position will I be in? As the head of the opposition, I will support the government, which will be formed. With regards to the threats that we face, we will be a constructive opposition.
The other option that Netanyahu has to form a government relies on extreme right-wing parties, including Israel Baytuna, headed by Avigdor Lieberman, the religious Shas movement, headed by Eli Yishai, and the parties of United Torah Judaism, National Union, and the Habayit HaYahudi. Netanyahu plans to give Israel Baytuna 5 cabinet positions, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Finance, and the courts. Shas will get 4 positions, including the Minister of Interior, Construction, and Housing.
I think that this government will not last more than a year or 2. I've said this many times. I'm afraid that after this happens, there will be new elections, and after the elections, there may be a change. If we learn from Israel's history, this is what has happened, and this is what will happen.
Despite the fact that a national unity government appears to be hard to achieve, Netanyahu and Livni do not rule out having more negotiations about forming a coalition. However, Livni rejected the current naming of combined teams of deliberations with Netanyahu until he clarifies his position on the peace process with the Palestinians.
We didn't meet the same position from the other side. There's not a desire to accept joint teams for deliberations. Ms. Livni rejected forming negotiation teams to address the differences between Kadima and Likud. I think that the points of differences between us are not that big, and that we can find a solution.
Netanyahu's dream of having a broad government that includes the Kadima party has evaporated. He has no other option before him except to form a narrow right-wing government, which will be at the whim of the party Israel Baytuna, headed by Avigdor Lieberman, and religious movement Shas, headed by Eli Yishai. The Kadima party, headed by Tzipi Livni, does not rule out that a government like this will fail after a short period, thus giving her another chance to gain power.
A preliminary criminal court in the Yemeni province of Imran has ordered a Yemeni man to pay retribution to a Jewish family whose son was murdered by a Muslim tribesman last December. The sentencing comes after 2 months of trials during which the family of the victim called for the execution of the murderer. Hamoud Munsar has the details.
Amidst heightened security measures and in the presence of a large crowd from the tribes and in the presence of the victim's father and wife, a Yemeni preliminary criminal court in the province of Imran has convicted Abdelaziz Yahya Abdi for the murder of Moshe Yash Nahari, a Yemeni Jew. The court ordered Abdi to pay retribution to the victim's family in the amount of $27,500. The defendant was spared the death penalty due to reasons of insanity.
The court hereby orders Abdelaziz Yahya Hamoud Abdi to pay retribution to the family of Moshe Yash Nahari for the murder of their son. The court ordered Abdi to pay retribution in the amount of 5.5 million riyals.
The court's ruling helped dissipate some of the fear and panic expressed by the killer's relatives and the security forces. The Yemeni security forces were fully deployed in and around the court building and its main entrance in anticipation of any tribal violence following the court's ruling. Meanwhile, the family of the victim, Moshe Yash, expressed disappointment with the court's ruling.
I don't like the judgment. I will appeal the court's ruling. I want to see him executed and buried. I want punishment for the murder.
I want the judgment of God and the judgments of the Prophet Muhammad bin Abdullah.
The murder of Moshe has stirred fear and panic amongst the Jewish community in the province of Imran. It also stirred fear among the local tribes, as many believe that a death penalty sentence may lead to angry reactions in the province, which may reflect negatively on the Jewish community. Due to reasons of insanity, the court has reduced the sentencing from the death penalty to retribution.
This mental disease, which the defendant has been diagnosed with, is affecting the defendant's mental capacity. Based on this, the defendant can't be held criminally accountable. The defendant can't be sentenced to death due to reasons of insanity. However, the defendant's state of mind will not relieve him of his civil liability.
Despite the fact that the ruling was described as balanced, the family of the victim has criticized it and vowed to appeal it. Mohammed Munsar al-Arabiya from the province of Imran, Yemen.
Hundreds of students from Ningihar University and Afghan civilians protested against the continuous killing of civilians and the desecration of the Holy Quran at a mosque in the city of Ghazni last Friday. The protesters repeated chants against the foreign forces and they demanded that they leave their country. نقل مراسل الجزيرة في إسلامباد عن مصادر رسمية. An Al Jazeera reporter from Islamabad stated that the leader of the Kanbal area in Al-Swat Valley, Hussein al-Din, was released along with 5 of his bodyguards after they were kidnapped by armed men that are believed to be affiliated with the Taliban in Pakistan. This undermined the ceasefire agreement that was signed by the local government with the blessing of the federal government and the Party for the Implementation of Sharia law led by Sufi Muhammad. This comes at the same time when 6,000 refugees doubt the stability of the ceasefire and fear returning to their homes where public services have collapsed. Our reporter Ahmed Zidan visited refugee-populated areas and listened to their stories. In this report, he brings us stories about their struggle.
There are more than 6,000 refugees from the Al-Swat Valley. They are staying in 16 different camps. Many of them went to school for shelter, schools that are no longer in use. Abd Allah is in his 40s. His story is similar to the story of thousands of other refugees. He says that he does not know what is going on and that he does not trust the agreements. Another refugee says that he will only return when he is sure that there's peace and security.
We
do not want to go back because the agreement that the government signed will not last. It will start with shelling, then shooting. The men are able to move quickly. However, it is very hard for the women and children. We will only return after they apply al-Sharia. Our homes are completely destroyed. Where should we go?
The return of the refugees is connected to the infrastructure that they lack. Their homes were destroyed, and the police stations that are responsible for protecting people were also destroyed by the suicide bombings. This is the reality that pushed the police and military men to seek refuge at schools. The schools have now become a target for the suicide bombers. This school is the oldest school in Swat. It was built in 1959 and was bombed at night.
They came at midnight up 19.
They came at night and bombed the building after 2 hours. No one saw them because there was a curfew at that time.
They destroyed bridges to forbid the soldiers from moving around. This is another challenge that refugees face. It makes them feel unsafe to return to the touristy valley that mostly depends on tourism. They are refugees inside their own country. The refugees live in a state of insecurity and doubt that dominates the agreement that was signed on paper. Ahmed Zidan, Al Jazeera, Swat Valley, Pakistan.
Iranian Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki and Bahraini Foreign Minister Khaled bin Ahmad Al Khalifa have both reconfirmed that the nature of the relationship between Manama and Tehran is good. This happened while Al Khalifa was visiting Iran. Iraqi President Jalal Talabani has also gone on an official visit to Iran. He discussed the aspects of strengthening the relationship between the two countries with Iranian leaders.
After many disputes, they are now meeting in Tehran. This meeting may symbolize that the relationship between Tehran and Bahrain is improving. Talks over the intense political situation, which took place a few days ago, seem to have entered a reconciliation phase. The presence of the Bahrain foreign minister, Khalid bin Ahmad Al Khalifa, in Iran has warmed the relationship between the two countries, which have common interests.
What we had heard during the previous period affected all of us and bothered us. However, the wisdom of the leadership of both countries has helped overcome the issue. This is the right step, and we will continue to build a good relationship between our two countries.
The reason for the dispute between Iran and Bahrain is because of a statement made by an Iranian official. The statement was made by an official who does not like improved relations between Iran and the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf. However, there are ongoing talks about security cooperation between the countries in the region. This may be a source of concern for those who depend on instability and tensions to justify their presence in the Gulf.
The relationship between Iran and Bahrain is a good one, which was built on mutual respect. It is known that Iran wants to strengthen its relationship with the countries in the Persian Gulf. However, this relationship is often jinxed by certain sides or even misunderstood at times. The decisions that are being made by the leaders of the countries are right for this relationship.
This is a new chapter for the relationship between Iran and Bahrain. It seems like political calm has returned to the region, and the relationship between Tehran and Al-Manama is much better after the foreign minister of Bahrain visited Iran. Tehran has now become a hub for politics. The borders that were and still are despised by foreign countries are now at the center of peace and security in the area. This is the 8th visit to Iran for the Iraqi President Jamal Talabani. Reality is now becoming the basis for a unique relationship between Tehran and Baghdad. Both countries struggled with one another in the past, but because of their common interests in the region, now their relationship has improved. The two countries are probably trying to paint a nice picture of their newfound relationship since Iraq's occupation. The Iraqi-Iranian talks in Tehran and their political agendas will not end here. The delegation that is accompanying President Talabani has come to identify the common relationships and interests of the two countries. Noor al-Din, Al-Alam, Tehran.
Due to the lack of evidence, Iraq's former Deputy Prime Minister, Tariq Aziz, has been acquitted in the case of the Friday prayers incidents. 15 Iraqi officials are standing on trial in the case. Today, the Iraqi High Criminal Court acquitted Aziz, but sentenced the former Iraqi Defense Minister, Ali Hassan al-Majid, and other defendants to death. Aziz's acquittal doesn't mean an end to his trial sessions, as he, along with 7 other officials from the former Iraqi regime, are being tried for the execution of 42 Iraqi merchants in 1992. In another development, Baghdad and Tehran continue to exchange visits with a special focus on their common issues. A day after the Iraqi president visited Tehran, the former Iranian president, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who is heading Iran's Expediency Council, accepted an invitation to visit Iraq and its holy places. During the visit, Rafsanjani, who is heading a political and religious delegation, will discuss a number of regional issues. The leaders will also discuss ways to improve political and economic cooperation between the two countries. It seems that the gap between the position of the U.S. Secretary of Defense and that of the U.S. Chief of Staff over the Iranian nuclear program is widening. During a television interview, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, said that Iran possesses fissile materials, enough to build an atomic bomb. Mullen's comments were contradicted by the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. During a separate interview, Gates said that Iran is far from possessing nuclear weapons. Gates added that there was still time for Washington and the world to convince Iran to abandon its controversial nuclear program. He further said that the challenge lies between the options of diplomacy and economic sanctions. Iran must break the deadlock that is surrounding its nuclear program. These were the words of the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mohammad al-Baradei, during the opening session of the IAEA ministers' meeting in Vienna. The meeting will focus on the Iranian Bushehr nuclear reactor, as well as assess the initial results from the analyses of the samples gathered by a delegation of IAEA experts from the Syrian site of Kobar. In addition, the meeting will discuss the election of a new IAEA Director General to succeed al-Baradei, as competition is intensifying between the Japanese envoy to the IAEA and his South African counterpart.
تكريما لشهداء الكلمة وتزامنا مع ذكرى سنوية.
An Iraqi organization for martyred journalists, in cooperation with the Iraqi Journalists Guild, commemorated the martyrdom of the journalists at the National Theatre in Baghdad.
قافلة من الشهداء قدمتها الصحافة العراقية ثمنا باهظا بدون ذنب اقترفت.
A large number of Iraqi journalists were killed. They paid a heavy price for defending the truth and reporting about the situation in Iraq in an objective manner. This is taking place in an era that is considered to be one of freedom and democracy.
وتكريما لهذه الدماء الطاهرة التي أريقت على أيادي الغدر والظلم.
The Organization for Martyred Journalists honored the journalists who were killed by forces of injustice on this day. They commemorated these journalists' martyrdom at the National Theatre in Baghdad in coordination with the Journalists Guild, during which poetry about love for Iraq was read and the role of Iraqi journalists in reporting the truth and building a new democratic Iraq was reinforced. The commemoration also included an exhibit where the pictures of the martyred journalists were displayed.
On this occasion, we remember all our journalist brothers. I'm referring to all the journalists, not just my brother Mahmoud. All of these journalists are our brothers. On this day, we feel sadness for losing our journalist brothers who died while trying to report about the situation in Iraq in an objective manner. They knew that they were entrusted with a mission and faced a lot of challenges to convey the truth to the Iraqi people.
الحاضرون من ذوي الشهداء وزملائهم في العمل.
The Iraqis who attended the commemoration talked about the neglect of the government for the families of the martyred journalists who paid with their lives to tell the truth. They demanded that government officials pay attention to this segment of the population because many of them were left without providers for their families.
التي فقد معظمها المعيل.
الصحفي والإعلامي والكاتب والشاعر والأديب يذكر الأمة بما غاب عنها من حقوق.
Journalists, writers, and novelists remind the nation about their missing rights. They also remind officials, regardless of their seniority, about the rights of the nation. We hope, I can say we demand, because we are not in a position to make demands. We only hope that the government pay attention to the families of the martyred journalists. These martyrs left their wives, daughters, and sons behind. Some sons and daughters might be minors, and some wives might be sick.
قد ترك أولاد قصر قد ترك زوجة مريضة أو أم مريضة.
شهداء الصحافة الذين قدموا أرواحهم فداء للكلمة.
The martyred journalists who paid with their lives to report the truth against violence and terrorism left their families behind.
بعد استشهادهم عوائلهم بين أرملة وأيتام.
Most of these families are facing harsh living conditions since losing their primary source of income, which affects their ability to live with dignity. They are waiting for a humanitarian gesture from the government, which is their right as Iraqi citizens.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic Video Podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.